We've been told the story all of our lives that America only goes to war when it has to, that we're the good guys, the heroes, the defenders of peace and liberty, that we don't start wars, we finish them, that we don't invade, we liberate, that we don't build empires, we protect democracy. And we're told that so often, so confidently, that we stop asking questions. It becomes gospel. It becomes truth by sheer repetition. If that were really true, if we only went to war when it was absolutely necessary, if we only use force as a last resort, then why the hell does the war never seem to end? Why is it always something? Why does it feel like the next war is already being planned before the last one's even finished? This kicks off our new 4-part series I'm calling The American War Machine. And I'm just going to say it plain. The United States doesn't just fight wars, it makes them, markets them, profits from them, and then keeps them going long after the headlines fade, long after the soldiers come home in silence, long after most people have moved on. War is not the exception, it's the business plan. And I say that not just as a podcast host sitting behind a microphone. I say that as a Marine Corps veteran. I served, I wore the uniform, I stood in formation, I did what I was told, just like thousands of us do every single day. I believed in the mission. I believed we were fighting for something bigger than ourselves, for justice, for stability, for peace. But even then, even in uniform, I started to notice things that didn't sit right with me. Like how often religion was used to sell the mission, to give it a moral cover. We'd pray before stepping out in patrol, not for safety, but for purpose. As if we were being blessed to go do God's work. We had chaplains that will quote scripture next to assault rifles. Commanders will say we were called or sent for a reason, a divine one. And when that's the message, when you're told you're fighting for something holy, something sacred, you don't question it. You don't hesitate. You just feel chosen. You feel righteous. And that's the point. That's how it works. Wrap the mission in faith, make it feel spiritual, make it feel like a calling, not a campaign. And once people believe they're on a mission from God, you don't need to sell them war anymore. You already got their hearts. And once you got that, their hands will follow. That's what we're talking about in this series. That's how the war machine really works. It doesn't begin with soldiers. It begins with symbols, with soft power, good intentions, mission trips, foreign aid, church groups, NGOs, democracy quote-unquote trainings. And we tell ourselves it's all to help. That's it for the people. That's it. That is compassion. That is leadership. But what it really is the setup. The warm-up act before the invasion. The pretty face before the drone strike. And we've seen it over and over again. In the Philippines, Christian missionaries showed up first, then American troops. In Haiti, church groups handed out Bibles while U.S. contractors built influence behind the scenes. In Iraq and Afghanistan, aid workers and faith-based nonprofits went as early scouts, clearing the way for tanks, for bases, for bombs. So, step 1, send in faith. Step 2, offer help. Step 3, take control. And if that doesn't work, that's when the real firepower rolls in. That's when you see the flag go up and the boots go down. So over the next 4 episodes, we're going to pull this thing apart. We'll follow the message, the money, and the mess to show how American empire doesn't just kill with weapons. It wins with words first. This machine was built to sell war as salvation, to make crisis look like charity, to turn occupation into opportunity. So buckle up. This is The Problem With The American War Machine. Episode 1, The War That Never Ends. let's talk about how it really begins.
I defend indigenous tribal people from missionaries.
Defend indigenous tribal people from missionaries.
That's right.
Wow. Well, on the onset, I don't know what you're thinking, Paul, but I'm going, well, that sounds interesting. Let me tell you, this is what comes to mind when you say that. It sounds like you're saying, hey, protect them from people coming in and trying to introduce a Western cultural Christianity to a totally different nation.
That's part of it.
That's part of it?
Yep.
Explain that real quick then.
So, well, I'm defending them from the kind of missionary who brings in the message of Jesus as a clash of civilizations that is there to conquer them and to replace their heritage.
Wow.
Most of the young people that come into the military are there probably because they're trying to figure out who they are. They come in, they're open to talk about anything. They ask all kinds of questions. From an evangelistic standpoint, I've always referred to them as ripe as black bananas. And it's great to be a government-paid missionary.
Missions to Military, a ministry designed to win and train the military for Jesus Christ.
The women that you're about to meet were kids when their parents joined a group then known as New Tribes Mission, one of the largest evangelical missions in the world, operating in remote parts of more than a dozen countries. But while their parents were off teaching the Bible, they were sexually abused by fellow missionaries, and now they want to make sure it never happens again.
If I asked all of you as a group, what's this about for you? Is there a word?
Truth.
Justice.
Justice.
Before the first boots hit the ground, before the first drone takes flight, before the first bomb is dropped, they send in the missionaries. This is no accident. The American war machine is a two-step operation. Step 1, soft power. Drop in under the guise of charity, faith, democracy, build trust, bring hope, make yourself welcome, appear friendly. But don't get it twisted. This is strategy, not accidental kindness. This is intentional conditioning, not goodwill. This is how empires start, not with tanks, but with testaments. So let's rewind to the 1820s in the Hawaiian Islands. In 1820, the first American missionaries, men like Hiram Bingham I, sent by the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, arrived with Bibles in hand and salvation in mind. They learned Hawaiian. They translated the Bible. They built schools. On the surface, harmless, even benevolent. But beneath the surface, a full-blown cultural erasure. Here's how Dr. Lilikala Kame'eliwa, a Native Hawaiian historian, described it. And I quote, "The missionaries were not content to save souls. They had to destroy everything we believed in, everything that made us Hawaiian. They took our gods, our language, our land." End quote. By the end of the 19th century, missionary descendants like Sanford B. Dole and Loring A. Thurston weren't just running churches. They were running the country. In 1893, they helped form the Committee of Safety and led a coup, backed by the United States Marines from the USS Boston, that overthrew Queen Liliuokalani, the last monarch of Hawaii. From queen to colony, and the missionaries made it possible. In her memoir, written from house arrest, Queen Liliuokalani reflected, and I quote, "It had not entered into our hearts that the United States will ever go so far as to deprive us of our nationality, our independence." End quote. This wasn't just a political, it was spiritual. They replaced native gods with Christian doctrine, replaced hula with hymns, replaced Oleo Hawaii with English. And Hanaunik Trask, a native Hawaiian activist, put it like this, and I quote, "They didn't just take our land, they took our gods, our language, our mana, and they called it salvation." Now let's skip forward to 1898, the Philippines. After quote-unquote liberating the islands from Spain, the U.S. replaced one empire with another. The Philippine-American War followed. Over 200,000 Filipino civilians died. And while troops burned villages, Protestant missionaries moved in. They brought schools, churches, Western medicine, and English. But this wasn't aid. It was indoctrination. As Filipino nationalist Renato Constantino wrote, quote, "The new conquerors were clever. They came not just with rifles, but with teachers and pastors. They taught us to despise ourselves, to see our heritage as backwards." And Apolinaro Mabini, Filipino revolutionary and legal thinker, added, and I quote, "What we want is the liberty of our country. What we condemn is the deception under the mask of education that teaches us to worship foreign ways and to forget our own." This was occupation, sanitized through sermons. Now we're going to fast forward to the 21st century. In Iraq and Afghanistan, missionary aid groups, many tied to evangelical churches, partner with U.S. military forces. Organizations like Samaritan's Purse, run by Franklin Graham, received federal contracts to distribute aid. But critics, including soldiers and civilians, say they also push religious conversion. At Bagram Air Base in 2009, soldiers were caught with Bibles in Pashto and Dari, prepared for distribution. This violated General Order No. 1, which explicitly forbids religious proselytizing in war zones. Pentagon officials ordered the Bibles burned, but the fact they were there at all, that says everything. One Afghan aid recipient told Al Jazeera, and I quote, "Why are they giving us this? We need food. We need security. This is not help. This is a trick." And journalist Chris Hedges, a former war correspondent, summed it up best, and I quote, "In war, missionaries do the work of empire. They convince the conqueror to love the conquerors." End quote. So let's connect the dots. Step 1, send in the missionaries. They draw maps, build clinics, open schools. They learn local customs, speak the language, build relationships. They normalize American presence under the banner of compassion. Step 2, once the trust is built, in come in the troops, the tanks, the bases, the private contractors, the drones. It's occupation without resistance, because the resistance already feels like betrayal. And if that doesn't work, step 3 happens. But that's for the next episode. This entire segment is a blueprint. From Hawaii to the Philippines to Iraq and Afghanistan, the missionaries came first. The troops came later. But the war was always there. Even when the 1993 U.S. Apology Resolution acknowledged America's role in overthrowing the Hawaiian Kingdom, it didn't reverse it. Pearl Harbor stayed, so did the bases. The culture never fully recovered. And the war machine, it learned that missionaries make the best advance team. So coming up next, how the missionary model evolved into a profit engine. From Eisenhower's warning about the military-industrial complex to the $1 trillion budget that now keeps the machine running year after year. War isn't just policy, it's product. Stick around.
After World War II ended, Harry Truman wanted to wind down military spending. But then fighting broke out in Korea, a proxy conflict in the Cold War. Truman's advisors urged him to increase military spending and armaments. That meant building the hydrogen bomb.
The H-bomb was detonated at Eniwetok.
These measures increased annual military spending dramatically. In 1952, it reached nearly $455 billion in today's dollars. Spending kept growing when American troops were sent to Vietnam. One of the big drivers in spending throughout the Cold War? Technology.
The United
And, of course, the few hundreds of thousands of innocent Afghans and Iraqis killed. Also lost their freedoms in the US and throughout the world in this nebulous war on terror. But there is one clear, irrefutable winner: the American military-industrial complex that President Eisenhower warned against 60 years ago. The $2.3 trillion tag of the Afghanistan war didn't benefit the country or its people, who are almost as poor today as they were 20 years ago. But in the past 2 decades, the 5 largest U.S. military contractors were granted $2 trillion worth of U.S. government contracts.
So far, we trace how faith and aid paved the war path. But the only way to that paths keep rolling is money. Because you can't launch missiles on good intentions. You can't invade on ideology alone. The real machinery of modern war, the engine that turns bullets into business, was built in the aftermath of World War II. Let's talk about how we got here. So number 1, from total war to permanent power. World War II didn't just reshape global politics. It remade the American economy from the ground up. In 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt created the War Production Board. Its mission? Transform civilian factories into weapons plants. And fast. Overnight, Detroit stopped making cars. Ford's Willow Run plant started cranking out B-24 bombers every 63 minutes. Typewriter factories made rifles. Lipstick companies made bullets. By 1944, war production made up nearly half the U.S. economy. Think about that. 40 to 44% of GDP, all in for war. That's not just a mobilization. That's an identity shift. But here's the part nobody talks about. These companies weren't just serving the war effort. They were planting the seeds of long-term power. General Motors, Boeing, Lockheed, they didn't go back to making just cars and planes for the public. They built relationships. They got used to government contracts. And they got a permanent seat at the table in DC. This wasn't a one-time partnership. This was the birth of something permanent. Then we go to the Cold War as economic engine. When World War II ended, people expected peace. Factories were supposed to slow down. Troops were supposed to come home, and America was supposed to focus on rebuilding, not rearming. But by 1950, that dream was over. President Truman signed off on a secret strategy paper called NSC 68. It called for a massive permanent military buildup, not for war, but to contain communism everywhere. We're talking budget skyrocketing from 13 billion to over 48 billion in 3 years. That's nearly 14% of the entire economy. And just like that, we switch from temporary war spending to permanent war readiness. Every conflict became a refill. Korea, Vietnam, the arms race, nuclear stockpiling. Each time the military budget grew, and the corporate contracts follow. And in case you're wondering if that was by accident, it wasn't. So let's move to Eisenhower's warning. In January 17, 1961, President Dwight D. Eisenhower gave his farewell address. And he doesn't sugarcoat it. This wasn't just a general turn president waving goodbye. This was a soldier warning us, warning you about what was already happening behind the scenes. And I quote, "In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex." That phrase, military-industrial complex, wasn't a throwaway line. It was the diagnosis of a disease, a system where defense contractors and the Pentagon were becoming one and the same. A system where war wasn't a last resort, it was a business model. And if that sounds like an exaggeration, just look where we are now. Now let's go to influence that spreads. In 2023 alone, defense companies spent over $141 million on lobbying. Let me say that again. $141 million just to influence Congress. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, Northrop Grumman. These companies don't just build weapons. They build policy. They write the bills. They advise the lawmakers. They hire former generals and Pentagon officials. The revolving door that makes the cash flowing. They don't wait for a war to start. They market it. Because war isn't a strategy anymore. It's product development. And every budget cycle is a new pitch. Now we go to the legacy today. Today, the US maintains over 750 military bases in more than 80 countries. That's not defense, that's an empire. In the Cold War, it ended decades ago, but our spending didn't. The Pentagon budget in 2024, over $820 billion. That's more than the next 10 countries combined. And for what? No war declaration, no draft, no end in sight. Just contract after contract, jet after jet, in a government more loyal to Raytheon than the average American classroom. Our military isn't a temporary machine anymore. It's the default setting. And as long as the engine runs, everything else runs dry. Housing, underfunded. Healthcare, stretched thin. Education, always on the chopping block. But fighter jets, approved. Defense contracts, fast-tracked. Profit, guaranteed. So there it is. From factory floors in the 1940s to classified memos to today's multi-billion-dollar weapons deal. The machine is real. It's not just built for war. It's built for profit from it. It's just like, but you know that we know how the engine was built. We have to ask, where does all that money go? Who's cashing the checks? Who gets left behind when missiles get funded but medicine doesn't? So coming up next, we're going to talk about budget over bullets, where the money goes. Stick around.
As it currently stands, at least at the end of 2023, the US military maintained an annual budget of $916 billion per year, which is already by far the highest military budget in the world. The US alone already constitutes about 40% of worldwide military spending, and spends more on their military than the next 8 biggest spenders all do combined: China, Russia, India, Saudi Arabia, the UK, Germany, Ukraine, and France. And under an invasion scenario where the country is invoking the Defense Production Act, that budget would skyrocket even further. At the height of the Vietnam War in the late 1960s, America was spending more than 9% of its GDP on the military, nearly 3 times greater percentage-wise than it is currently. If the US upped its military budget back to Vietnam War era levels again today, we'd be looking at an annual budget of more like $2.4 trillion a year.
When I see a State Department get a certain amount of money and a military budget be 10 times that, and I see a struggle within government to get people like more basic services, and then that department that got that. I mean, we got out of 20 years of war, and the Pentagon got a $50 billion raise. Like, that's shocking to me. Now, I may not understand exactly the ins and outs and the incredible magic of an audit, but I'm a human being who lives on the earth and can't figure out how $850 billion to a department means that the rank and file still have to be on food stamps. Like, to me, that's fucking corruption.
Broken Finger, straight classics.
So far, we've walked through the machinery that keeps American war running, how we turn missionaries into marketers, how we turn weapons into economic strategy. But none of it works without one thing: money. Because you can't fight endless wars without fuel. And in America, war is never about necessity anymore. It's about return on investment. So if you really want to know what this country values, don't listen to the speeches, don't quote the Constitution, just look at the receipts. Let's start with the Pentagon. Every single year, Congress debates the federal budget. You'll see hours of floor speeches, partisan finger pointing, press conferences about fiscal responsibility. But then when it comes to the Pentagon, no debate, no drama, no cuts, just a blank check. In 2023, the federal government spent roughly $1.7 trillion on discretionary programs. That's the part of the budget where Congress decides what gets funded and what doesn't. Out of what? More than $805 billion, almost half, went to defense. That's not even counting classified intelligence spending or interest on previous military debt. Let me say that again. Half. And don't get it twisted. This isn't all going to soldiers and veterans. No. We're talking drones, submarines, tactical jets, spy satellites, ballistic missile systems that cost $2 billion a pop. We're not just funding an army, we're funding an arms industry. Weapons companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, they don't just benefit from defense spending, they depend on it. And that number keeps going up. In 2001, right after 9/11, the Pentagon's base budget was about $287 billion. By 2024, it nearly tripled. And remember, this is happening in peacetime. There's no formal war declaration, but we're still throwing more money at defense than the next 10 countries combined. Let that sink in. So it's China, Russia, India, the UK, France, Saudi Arabia, Japan, Germany, South Korea, Brazil. All of them combined still don't match us. Then let's go to the human needs and what the military wants. Now let's do the comparison. In that same 2023 budget year, education funding got about $90 billion. Housing programs around $60 billion. Mental health and substance use treatment barely $12 billion. So just to spell that out, we spend 10 more times on defense than we do on education. Over 13 times more than we do on housing, and nearly 70 times more than we spend trying to fight addiction and suicide in this country. How is that moral? We got kids sharing textbooks printed before they were born, teachers buying classroom supplies out of pocket, veterans sleeping on the bridges, people dying from ration insulin. But Raytheon, they're doing just fine. In fact, they posted $67 billion in revenue in 2023. Lockheed Martin, over $66 billion. Why? Because your struggle doesn't make stock prices rise, but bombs do. And here's the question no one wants to answer. What are we buying all this defense for? What are we defending against? Because the biggest killers in America aren't enemy combatants. They're poverty, their addiction, their despair. In 2022, nearly 600,000 people died of drug overdose. That's more than every US combat death in every war since Vietnam combined. And yet, Congress can't seem to find more than crumbs for treatment or recovery, but they can find $10 billion for a new hypersonic missile that hasn't even been tested. So they keep saying it's about keeping Americans safe. But I want you to stop and ask, safe from what? Because I'll tell you what's killing people in this country. It's not sleeper cells, it's not foreign agents, it's kids in rural towns ODing on fentanyl. It's women dying during childbirth because hospitals close. It's men working themselves to death because they can't afford to retire. And we treat those deaths like background noise. You want to stop threats? Fund schools. You want to protect lives? Make insulin free. You want to be a quote-unquote defender of freedom? Start by defending housing, clean water, and human dignity. Instead, we keep doubling down on destruction. Because in this system, conflict is profitable. Compassion is not. This isn't just wasteful spending. It's moral theft. It's economic violence. Because every dollar that goes to another warship is a dollar stolen from a school. Every new missile system is a hospital that never got built. Every foreign base we expand is a housing project that crumbles. And the truth is that the people making these decisions, they're not voting based on safety. They're voting based on stock portfolios, campaign donations, lobbying dinners, private golf retreats in Northern Virginia. These aren't defense experts. They're shareholders in a war economy, and we're the ones paying for it. So imagine what we could build with $850 billion a year. Imagine a country where every child went to a fully funded school, where every parent could take their kid to the doctor without going bankrupt, where every veteran didn't have to beg for shelter, where no one had to choose between groceries and meds. That's not a dream, that's math. But it won't happen until we ask the real question. Why are we always told there's no money, except when it's time to kill? So coming up next, we trace the money to its source. Because this budget doesn't fall out of the sky. It's written line by line by the people we elect. So who's influencing them? How much does it cost to buy a senator's vote? And why are defense contractors some of the biggest political donors in America? Stick around. We're naming names.
This is the strategy of power. Weapon manufacturing giants like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, or General Electric spread their plants across as many states as possible. More states means more seats in Congress to defend their interests. More seats in Congress means more money in the defense budget and multi-million contracts won by the weapons firms, which means more jobs for that district, which equals more votes to that congressman who has signed those contracts to be re-elected. So the trade is more money and weapons in exchange for more votes, or what's known as pork barrel politics.
So we've seen the size of the war budget. We've seen the consequences. The underfunded schools, unaffordable housing, a healthcare system that's a punchline. But here's the real question. How does this keep happening? How does Congress, the body that's meant to represent us, keep signing off on billion-dollar bomb contracts? Yet the act broke when it comes to breakfast programs. Well, welcome to the real Capitol Hill, where campaign donations write legislation, Lobbyists deliver policy in manila folders, and war isn't just strategy, it's sales. So let's begin. In 2023 alone, the U.S. defense industry spent over $141 million lobbying Congress, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Lobbying doesn't include PACs, which are political action committees that funnel mega donations into candidates, or dark money PACs that obscure sources, or cushy consulting gigs and board positions that magically appear after an official leaves office. The top spenders is the usual Lockheed Martin, maker of the F-35 fighter jets, $14 million in lobbying. Raytheon Technologies, behind missiles and radars, were well over $13 million in lobbying. Northrop Grumman, builders of drones and stealth bombers, $10 million plus again. Boeing, yes, that Boeing, $10.5 million in 2023 lobbying despite all the air travel headlines. This isn't national defense lobbying, it's corporate war sales. And this is a revolving door. This gets better, or worse, depending how you use it. So the revolving door, where one day you're in Congress or the Pentagon, and then next you are cashing checks for at Lockheed or Raytheon. In 2021 alone, a project on government oversight, POGO, report found that at least 672 former government officials, from generals to senior staffers, went to work for top 20 defense contractors. Let's break it down. Boeing alone hired 85 former officials. Lockheed picked up 44. Raytheon and Northrop each hired dozens. These aren't temporary jobs. They are policy and procurement positions. People helping design contracts for their old colleagues in government. Not corruption, it's legal influence built into the machine. So how much does it cost to buy influence? Well, let's talk government officials. Senator Jim Inhofe is a former Republican chair of the Senate Armed Service Committee. He received over $500,000, so $500,000, from defense sector donors during his tenure. Then we have Representative Mike Rogers of Alabama, current chair of the House Armed Services Committee. In 2022, he got over 60% of his campaign contribution from defense and aerospace firms. This isn't ideology, it's investment. A big donation from Lockheed, Boeing, or Raytheon, that return isn't PR, it's contracts, preferably no bid, renewable with zero oversight. And make no mistake, this isn't a partisan scheme. War is bipartisan. In 2024, the 2024 National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA, passed the Senate 86-11. That's no debate. That's consensus. Democrats, Republicans, they both vote for mega military budgets, especially when those budgets mean jobs in their states. You think a Democrat in Virginia vote against a Raytheon plant? They just greenlight the next drone program before funding a school lunch. So, what does it actually mean? It means the war machine doesn't turn on necessity. It turns on access, donations, and fear. Congress could redirect funds to affordable housing, public education, universal healthcare, infrastructure, climate resilience. But they don't, because the donors don't live in our neighborhoods. They don't teach our kids. They don't stock our shelves or drive our buses. They sit in high rises in DC, Arlington, and New York City. Until that changes, we fund bombs, not books. So far, this is what we cover. 1. The military budget is bloated by design. 2. Contractors are spending hundreds of millions to protect it. 3. Politicians, most of them, are already paid. The real punchline, we let it happen. We confuse procurement with patriotism. We cheer military budgets while saying there's no money for teachers. And every time we do, the machine gets stronger. So coming up next, the final stretch of this episode. Because if this continues unchecked, unquestioned, we're not funding war anymore. We're living it.
I wanted to ask you about the budget, the president's budget. Increases for the military, about 5% increase for the military. At the same time, dramatic decreases for social programs. Your sense that you've been going through it.
Juan, this budget is budget lessons I learned, as Donald Trump learned, from dictator Kim. So the first thing you do is you take care of your military. You pour every dollar you can into a military that is bigger than you need, and that's your number one goal, to make sure that you have loyalty and stay in power. Then what you do is you take the disabled and the poor on Medicare, and you cut close to $1 trillion over the next 10 years out of care for them. You take SNAP, which provides nutrition to pregnant women, children, and elderly people and the disabled. Hey, let's slash that. Education. There were all these students who were ripped off by for-profit colleges that cost 4 or 5 times what a community college did and gave you a lousy education, and some of them went broke. Make them pay every penny. They, in fact, say it isn't fair unless these students pay it back. So they're taking the side of the bankers against the students. Housing. Let's cut money for housing. People who are disabled, people who are on AIDS, people who are poor. We're going to cut that. And to New York and New Jersey, by saying we are not going to fund the replacement of the 110-year-old tunnel through which thousands of commuters and people traveling up and down the East Coast travel every day. Tunnels owned by the federal government's Amtrak.
Tunnels across the Hudson River.
Under the Hudson River.
Yeah.
Donald Trump's message to New York and New Jersey: drop dead.
Tonight's Tax Insider, Congress and defense spending. This week, Representative Mac Thornberry, chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, proposed an increase in the defense budget by billions of dollars. He says it would halt a severe combat readiness problem ignored by President Obama. For more, I'm joined by Ryan Alexander, president of the nonpartisan Taxpayers for Common Sense. Ron, the Pentagon asked for $583 billion. Thornberry would shift another $18 billion from the account that finances ongoing war operations to pay for additional ships, jet fighters, helicopters, and more. It's stuff the Pentagon didn't even ask for. Put this into context for us.
There's a few important things to remember here. First of all, the House Armed Services Committee, this is the authorizing committee. They don't have the authority to actually spend this money. They're saying, we'd like to authorize more money. We'd like to make these increases. And as you say, they want to spend it on things that the Pentagon didn't even ask for, like adding a littoral combat ship, adding elements that the Pentagon said they didn't need. What they're doing, looks a little bit like they're trying to be responsible budgeters, taking things that are neither overseas nor contingent out of the overseas contingency account and putting them into the base budget. But they are increasing top-line spending for defense, which in turn will probably cause other lawmakers to say they need to increase domestic discretionary spending, kind of putting us in a place where that percentage of our money that goes towards debt service increases even higher.
And possibly helping their jurisdiction.
Let's close this out the same way this country began, with a war. The United States didn't accidentally stumble into militarism. It wasn't some side effect of global power. War is the business model, and peace was never the plan. From the start, violence was woven into the American DNA. The revolution wasn't just about independence. It was about property, profit, and power. And every generation since has found a new enemy to conquer, a new reason to fight, and a new flag to plant. So let's walk through the record. The Mexican-American War in the 1840s. We say we spilled quote-unquote American blood on American soil. But what we wanted was Texas, California, and a coast-to-coast empire, even if it meant expanding slavery. Then the Spanish-American War. We called it a liberation, but we took Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. And in the Philippines, we slaughtered hundreds of thousands in a war that we started, not to free them, but to own them. Then we have World War I, advertised as a noble fight, to make the world safe for democracy. In reality, it was a war of profit and imperial allegiance, fueled by industrial arms makers and the banks behind them. And after World War II, instead of stepping back, we stepped on the gas. Weapons manufacture didn't go dormant, they went global. So intelligence didn't disband, it got a new name, the CIA. We didn't retire from war. We franchised it. And just before leaving office, President Dwight Eisenhower, a 5-star general himself, issued the last warning, as I mentioned earlier. He saw it coming because he helped build it. And he knew once this machine got rolling, it wouldn't stop. Because the Cold War didn't just create tension, it created a permanent excuse. An excuse to overthrow Iran's democracy in 1953, to take out Guatemala's reformist president in 1954, to back Chile's dictator in 1973. Each time, we use the same playbook. Call it communism, frame it as freedom, send the troops. But this wasn't random chaos, this was a strategy, this was design. Because war doesn't survive on politics alone. It needs something deeper, something more divine. And that brings us to the key part of this whole machine, the part too many people don't want to talk about: religion. Missionaries were often the first wave of US expansion. Before the Marines landed, the ministers arrived. They weren't just spreading the gospel, they were scouting the terrain, softening resistance, embedding Western values, paving the way for occupation by calling it salvation. From Hawaii to the Philippines, from Central America to Africa, religion was the velvet glove on the iron fist. The sermon said grace, but the bullets say ownership. We turned Christianity into a tool for empire. We sanctify violence with scripture, and every bomb since has been baptized in the language of righteousness. And we still do this. We still talk about American soldiers as warriors of God. Still justify drone strikes as with moral clarity. Still let politicians wrap billion-dollar contracts in Bible verses. But let's be clear, none of that is holy. It's marketing. Because if you want people to kill and be okay with it, you've got to convince them that it's not just policy, it's divine destiny. And the result? We've created a machine that doesn't just need enemies, it needs believers. It needs Americans to believe we're always the good guys, that our wars are always justified, that our victims had it coming. And it works, because now war is normalized, expected, profitable. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, these aren't just defense contractors. They're lobbyists, policy writers, gatekeepers of the war economy. By the time we get to Iraq and Afghanistan, the war machine wasn't even pretending. We had private mercenaries guarding oil fields. We had pallets of cash, actual pallets, just disappear. We had senators trading defense stocks the same day they voted to expand war budgets. This isn't mismanagement. This is a feature. This is the machine running exactly as intended. So if you ever find yourself wondering why peace feels so impossible in this country, remember, peace was never profitable. Expansion was, control was, fear was. From the missionaries planting crosses, to the generals authorizing drone strikes, to the Congress members taking donations from defense CEOs. This country didn't fall into militarism. It was built for it. And the biggest lie is that it's for freedom. Because if we ever really believe in freedom, we wouldn't keep building bombs while schools crumble. We wouldn't let the same companies that profit from debt write the laws that determine life. We would torn this machine down already. But maybe it's not too late. Because if the war machine can be built, it can be dismantled. But not by pretending this was about a few bad apples, or that the next election will fix it. It starts with the truth. And that's what we're doing here, one episode at a time. So coming up next, we wrap up with a full reflection and recap of what we uncovered this episode. And trust me, it's not just about what we did. It's about what we continue to do and what it's going to take to stop it. Stick around. So let's step back. We cover a lot of in this first episode. And if your head's spinning, that's okay. It should be. Because this wasn't just a history lesson. It was an X-ray of the American soul. We started by tracing how the US was built for war. Not by accident, but by intention. We followed the path from missionaries to missiles, from preachers planting flags to contractors cashing checks, from idealistic rhetoric to imperial reality. And we laid it out plain. This country doesn't just go to war. It needs war. It profits from war. It sustains itself on war. Not just through bullets and bombs, but through the budgets, the politics, and yeah, through the belief system we were all raised in. And let me be crystal clear on this part. Religion is not the problem. Faith is not the enemy. I'm not here to mock belief. I'm not here to shame people for seeking hope or community or a higher purpose. But what is the problem is using that belief as a justification to kill, to occupy, to dominate. When religion becomes a tool for violence, when scripture gets twisted into a military strategy, when God bless America becomes a permission slip for drone strikes, that's not faith. That's fascism in disguise. And I want to take a second to say this as someone who's worn the uniform. I'm a proud Marine. I serve this country because I believed in its promise, because I believe in its people, because I believe we could be better, and I still do. This podcast isn't about tearing American down. It's about holding up the mirror and asking, is this really who we want to be? I don't hate the United States. I love it. And it's because I love it that I speak out. Because love doesn't mean silence. Love means accountability. Love means wanting better for the people who come after us. So if you're sitting there thinking, but I believe in God, I'm not part of this, I hear you. But here's the question. When churches stay silent about bombs falling on children, when politicians quote the Bible while cutting food stamps and selling weapons to tyrants, at what point do we say, not in my name? Because the war machine survives on more than just funding. It needs silence. It needs obedience. It needs us to confuse patriotism with purpose and righteous with revenge. And that's the lie I want us to confront today. Not just the lie that America is always the good guy, but the deeper lie. The one that says, if God is in our side, anything we do must be justified. That lie has killed millions. That lie propped up dictators, justifies invasion, sanitizes torture, and turns entire nations into battlegrounds for profit. So what now? If we built a system that runs on fear, violence, and holy excuses, how do we stop it? Well, we start by telling the truth, by naming the machine for what it is, by calling out the gears, even when the gear wears a cross. Even when they speak in the name of freedom. Because here's the uncomfortable reality. If we don't confront it, if we keep letting this cycle continue, it won't just be the next war. It'll be the next excuse. And the next body, and the next lie, and the next generation raised to believe that blood was righteous. But it doesn't have to be this way. We built this machine. We can break it. One truth at a time. One story at a time. One refusal to stay silent at a time. So next week on The Problem Week, the American War Machine series, we follow the money. Because if war is the product, who's getting paid? We're talking about the real winners of every invasion, occupation, and drone strike. The CEOs, the lobbyists, the investors who never wear the uniform, but always cash the check. Now, the next episode is called Blood for Profit. Who gets paid when we go to war? And spoiler alert, it's not the soldiers, it's not the veterans, and it's definitely not the people in the countries we bomb. It's the corporations who treat war like a business plan, because it is. So buckle up, because this machine doesn't run on freedom, It runs on blood money. Again, thanks for listening. I'm Luis, proud Marine, teacher, and believer in something better. And this has been The Problem With.